Nobody talks about how a single pot fed entire streets. Not a fancy Le Creuset from John Lewis. A battered old saucepan, blackened on the bottom, handle loose, sitting on a gas ring that cost $1 to run. In the 1950s, a housewife with 4 children, 12 shillings for the week's meat, and no freezer could put a meal on the table that kept everyone quiet until morning. 1 pot, 1 burner, no waste. These 30 dinners were not recipes, they were survival strategies disguised as supper. And most of them have vanished completely from British kitchens. Before we start, hit subscribe, because some of these will make you ring your nan. Let us begin. Number 30. Potato and onion stovies. Stovies from leftovers. Scottish housewives stretched leftover dripping and a few potatoes into a dish that fed the whole family from a single heavy-bottomed pan. The method was almost embarrassingly simple. Slice potatoes thin, layer them with onions in the pot, add a few tablespoons of beef dripping or lard, pour in just enough water to create steam, then clamp the lid on and cook low for 40 minutes. The potatoes on the bottom fried golden in the fat. The ones on top steamed soft and floury. The onions dissolved into a sweet, savory paste that bound everything together. In 1953, 5 pounds of potatoes cost about 10 pence. That was supper for 6, with change left over. Children scraped their plates clean. Fathers added a shake of brown sauce. Mothers took pride in a dish that asked for almost nothing, but delivered something warm and filling on the coldest Glasgow night. Stovies were Monday food, Tuesday food, any day the purse was light and the ladder was bare. Number 29. Leek and potato soup. Welsh kitchens ran on leeks the way engines ran on petrol. When the allotment delivered a bundle of fat leeks and there was nothing else in the house, a housewife would chop them with whatever potatoes remained, toss them into the pot with a knob of butter, cover with water, and simmer until everything collapsed into a thick, silky soup. No stock cube was needed if the butter was decent. A handful of salt, a crack of white pepper, and that was tea. The soup was so thick you could stand a spoon in it. Children dunked hunks of bread until the bowl was clean. In mining communities, a pot of leek and potato soup waited on the range all day, ready for whenever the shift ended. By 1956, leeks cost almost nothing if you grew your own, and most families in the valleys did. It was fuel, it was warmth, it was home. Number 28. Oxtail soup. Before oxtail became a restaurant novelty at 12 pounds a bowl, it was the cheapest cut at the butcher's counter. Housewives bought 2 or 3 oxtail pieces for $1 and simmered them with carrots, onions, and a bay leaf for 3 or 4 hours until the meat surrendered from the bone and the broth turned dark and glossy with natural gelatin. The flavor was extraordinary, deep and beefy, far richer than anything a prime cut could produce in the same time. Children loved fishing out the bones and sucking the marrow. Mothers strained the soup, shredded the meat back in, and served it with thick slices of bread. 1 pot of oxtail soup lasted 2 days easily. In the coldest weeks of January, when the coal fire barely held and the windows rattled, that soup was the warmest thing in the house. Number 27th. Peas pudding stew. In the northeast, dried split peas were currency. Housewives soaked them overnight, then simmered them in the same pot as a cheap bacon joint or a ham hock, letting the peas absorb all that smoky, salty pork flavor as they broke down into a thick, golden mush. The meat flavored the peas and the peas thickened the broth. 1 pot did double duty. By 1954, a ham hock cost about 1 shilling and 6pence, and a pound of split peas maybe 4pence. That single pot fed a family of 5 for 2 meals. The first night was the stew itself, thick and hearty. The second night, The leftover peas pudding was sliced cold onto bread. Nothing was wasted. Not the bone, not the cooking liquor, not a single spoonful. Number 26. Bacon and cabbage pot. Irish and Welsh families alike kept this one in rotation every single week. A joint of collar bacon was soaked overnight to draw out the salt, then boiled in a deep pot with a whole cabbage cut into wedges, with carrots and potatoes added in the last half hour. The bacon flavored everything it touched. The cabbage turned sweet and silky in the pork broth. The potatoes soaked up the salty, smoky liquid until they almost fell apart on the plate. A collar joint cost about 2 shillings in 1955, cheap enough for midweek, but satisfying enough to feel like Sunday. Mothers sliced the bacon at the table. Children fought over the crispiest potato. The leftover broth became soup the next day with a handful of barley thrown in. Number 25. Scouse. Liverpool's most famous dish was born in the docks, not the dining room. Scouse was a one-pot lamb or beef stew, so associated with the city that its people took the dish's name as their own. Housewives browned cheap scrag end or neck of lamb, added potatoes, carrots, onion, and just enough water to cover, then left it on a low flame for hours. The potatoes dissolved into the broth, thickening it naturally. The meat softened until it fell apart at the prod of a spoon. It was served in deep bowls with pickled red cabbage on the side and bread to mop the bottom. In lean weeks, when there was no meat at all, they made blind scouse, the same stew without the lamb, just root vegetables simmered in water with a bit of dripping for flavor. Nobody complained. You ate what was in the pot, and you were grateful for it. Number 24. Scotch broth, mutton, barley, and vegetables. Every Scottish household had a version of this, and every mother swore hers was best. A neck of mutton, pearl barley, split peas, diced turnip, carrot, and leek all went into the pot together first thing in the morning. By tea time, the broth had turned thick and cloudy, the barley swollen and soft, the vegetables melted into the liquid. The mutton flavor ran through every spoonful. In 1952, a neck of mutton cost about 1 and 4. The barley and peas together maybe 6pence. The whole pot fed 8 for less than 2 shillings. Diaries from the era recall the ritual of skimming the fat from the surface, the careful seasoning, and the way the smell drew children in from the street long before anyone called them. Number 23. Irish stew. Across the water, and on every table in Liverpool, Birmingham, and anywhere the Irish settled, this stew needed nothing more than mutton, potatoes, onions, and water. No carrots, no fancy herbs. Purists insisted on nothing but the holy trinity of ingredients, layered in the pot and left alone for 3 hours. The potatoes broke down and thickened the broth naturally. The mutton fell off the bone. The onions sweetened and disappeared. Some people added a sprig of thyme. Others considered that sacrilege. What nobody argued about was the result. A bowl of Irish stew on a cold night with a thick slice of soda bread was as close to heaven as a working family got on a Wednesday evening in 1955. The pot sat on the range all day. Whoever came home first got the first bowl. Number 22. Corned beef and potato hash. When the tin of corned beef came out of the cupboard, everyone knew it was the end of the week. Housewives diced the dense pink meat with cold boiled potatoes and onion, pressed the lot into a heavy frying pan with a spoonful of dripping, and cooked it low until the bottom formed a thick golden crust. 1 pot, 1 burner, 20 minutes. The trick was patience. Leave it alone long enough for that crust to form, then flip it, or serve it crust side up with a fried egg on top if eggs were available. A tin of corned beef cost about 1 and 3 in 1956. With potatoes, the whole meal came to under 2 shillings for the family. It was not glamorous. But that salty, crispy, starchy plate cleared every time. Number 21. Lentil soup. Red lentils needed no soaking, cooked in 30 minutes, and cost almost nothing. A housewife with an onion, a carrot, a handful of red lentils, and a stock cube could produce a thick, warming soup in the time it took to listen to Mrs. Dale's diary on the wireless. The lentils dissolved completely, creating a naturally creamy texture without adding milk or cream. A pinch of curry powder, just a pinch, lifted the whole thing into something almost exotic by 1950s standards. In homes where meat appeared only twice a week, lentil soup filled the gap without complaint. A pound of red lentils cost about 6pence and stretched to 4 or 5 pots of soup. Mothers made it so often their children could smell it from the garden gate. Number 20. Sausage casserole. When the butcher's cheapest pork sausages were all the budget allowed, housewives turned them into something far greater than a simple fry-up. Brown the sausages in dripping, add sliced onions, tinned tomatoes, and a tin of baked beans. Then simmer the lot together for 30 minutes until the sauce thickened and the sausages plumped. Serve with thick slices of bread to soak up the tomatoey, beany gravy. 8 sausages cost about 1 shilling and 6pence in 1957. The tin of tomatoes cost 4pence. The beans cost another 4pence. That was a full family supper for just over 2 shillings. Children loved it because it tasted like bonfire night without the cold. Mothers loved it because it made itself while they got on with the ironing. Number 19. Vegetable broth with barley. When there was truly nothing in the house but root vegetables and a bag of pearl barley, this was what appeared on the table. Carrots, turnip, onion, and celery, if you had it, all diced small and simmered with a handful of barley in salted water. No meat at all. The barley swelled and turned the thin broth into something substantial, almost porridge-like in its thickness. A stock cube dissolved in the water added enough savory depth to stop it tasting like boiled rainwater. By 1953, this was a twice-weekly meal in many households. Not by choice, by necessity. But mothers learned to season it well, to add a bay leaf or a shake of Worcestershire sauce, and children ate it without too much protest because there was nothing else coming after. Number 18. Neck of lamb hot pot. Different from the Lancashire version, this used the very cheapest neck chops, bone in, layered with nothing more than potatoes and onions in a deep casserole dish. The bones gave body to the gravy. The fat from the lamb basted the potatoes on top until they crisped golden brown. 3 hours in a low oven, and the transformation was complete. Tough, cheap meat became tender. Watery vegetables became rich. The kitchen filled with a smell that made the neighbors jealous. Neck chops cost about 10 pence a pound in 1954, a dish that took pennies and patience and turned them into something families still talk about with longing 70 years later. Number 17. Rabbit and root vegetable stew. Before myxomatosis devastated the rabbit population in 1953, a wild rabbit cost almost nothing. 6pence at the market, or free if you knew someone with a gun and a field. Housewives jointed the rabbit, browned the pieces in dripping, then added carrots, parsnips, onion, and a handful of flour to thicken the gravy. 3 hours of slow simmering, and the meat fell from the bone, sweet and tender. 1 rabbit stretched to feed 6, with bread on the side. The stew was so common in rural communities that children grew bored of it. They did not know they were eating the cheapest protein in Britain. They just knew it tasted like Tuesdays. Number 16. Kidney soup. Before kidneys became something only adventurous restaurant diners ordered, they were 3pence a pair at the butcher's, and every housewife knew what to do with them. Dice the kidneys, Brown them quickly in a hot pan with onions, add water, a splash of Worcestershire sauce, and a sliced potato to thicken. Simmer for 40 minutes and serve steaming in deep bowls. The flavor was intense, almost beefy, with a richness that belied the cost. A pot of kidney soup fed 4 for less than a shilling. The trick was soaking the kidneys in salted water first to remove any bitterness. Mothers who skipped that step only did so once. Number 15. Tripe and onion stew. In northern mill towns, tripe was not a curiosity. It was a weekly staple that kept factory workers fueled through 12-hour shifts. Housewives simmered pale slabs of honeycomb tripe in milk with onions, butter, and white pepper until the tripe turned silky and the milk thickened into a savory white sauce. The whole thing was made in one pot. The smell divided streets. Children fled. Fathers demanded seconds. A pound of tripe cost about 9p in 1955. With a pint of milk and 2 onions, the total cost came to under 1 and 6 for the family. Mothers served it with mashed potatoes and white bread to soak up the milky liquor. It was not pretty, but it was protein. It was cheap, and in a Lancashire winter, it was hot. Number 14. Shin beef stew with dumplings. Shin was the cut nobody wanted, tough as boot leather if you rushed it, but magnificent if you gave it time. Housewives browned cubes of shin in a heavy pot, added onions, carrots, turnip, and a pint of water with an oxo cube. Then they left it on the lowest flame for 3 hours. In the last 30 minutes, suet dumplings went in on top. The dough puffed and steamed, absorbing the rich gravy below. Shin cost about 1 and 2 a pound. The dumplings cost pennies. That single pot produced a meal so hearty that even growing teenage boys went quiet at the table. The gelatin from the shin gave the gravy a body that no other cut could match. This was the architecture of British comfort food. Low and slow in a single pot. Number 13. Chicken and vegetable soup. A whole boiling fowl, too old and tough for roasting, cost about 3 shillings in 1955. Housewives simmered it whole in a deep pot with carrots, onion, celery, and a handful of peppercorns for 4 or 5 hours. The meat fell from the bone. The broth turned golden and fragrant. She would strip the carcass, return the shredded meat to the pot, and serve it with noodles or just bread. One old hen produced enough soup for 2 days of meals. Nothing was wasted. Even the carcass went back into the pot with fresh water for a second, lighter stock. That second stock became the base for next week's soup. The cycle was endless, efficient, and utterly practical. Number 12. Tinned tomato soup with toast soldiers. Not from a Heinz tin. That was always the fallback. Housewives made their own by frying onions in butter, adding 2 tins of cheap plum tomatoes, a pinch of sugar, salt and pepper, then simmering for 20 minutes and mashing with a fork. No blender needed. The slightly chunky texture was the whole point. Served in deep bowls with thick fingers of buttered toast for dipping. 2 tins of tomatoes cost maybe 8p. The butter and bread cost another few pennies. A pot of homemade tomato soup fed the children's tea for almost nothing, and tasted worlds apart from anything that came out of a tin. Mothers made it so often, the recipe lived entirely in muscle memory. Number 11. Ham hock and beans stew. A single ham hock, all bone and sinew and pink meat clinging to the joint, cost about 1 and 6. Dried haricot beans soaked overnight, then simmered with the hock, an onion, a carrot, and a bay leaf for 3 hours. The beans swelled and turned creamy. The hock released its salt and smoke into the broth. The meat slipped from the bone in tender shreds. Mothers stirred it all together, crushed a few beans against the side of the pot to thicken the liquid, and served it in deep bowls with crusty bread. 1 hock and a pound of beans fed a family of 6. The leftover bone went back into the pot the next day with more water for a thinner broth. Nothing was ever finished. It just became something else. Number 10. Cod and potato chowder. On Fridays, when Catholic families avoided meat and everyone else fancied a change, housewives made fish chowder from the cheapest cod pieces the fishmonger could offer. Diced potatoes, onion, and a knob of butter went into the pot first, softened in a little water. Then the cod was laid on top, and a pint of milk poured over. The pot was simmered gently for 20 minutes, until the potatoes softened, the fish flaked, and the milk turned into a thin, creamy broth. A shake of white pepper and a handful of chopped parsley finished it, if the garden provided it. Cod pieces cost about 1 shilling. The whole chowder came in under 2 shillings and tasted like the seaside brought indoors. Children who hated fish on its own ate every drop of this without complaint, because the potatoes and milk softened everything into something gentle and warming. Number 9. Beef and onion pot roast. When a housewife found a cheap piece of brisket, she did not roast it dry and hope for the best. She put it in the pot with 4 quartered onions, a splash of water, and a lid clamped tight. 3 hours in a low oven, and the brisket surrendered completely. The onions dissolved into a sweet, dark gravy that needed nothing else. No stock cube, no flour. Just beef and onions doing what they do best when left alone with heat and time. Brisket cost about 1 8 a pound in 1956, half the price of a decent roasting joint. The pot roast method turned this cheap, tough cut into something that carved like butter. It was served with boiled potatoes, cooked in the same gravy for the last 40 minutes. Number 8. Pork belly and root vegetable braise. Before pork belly became the darling of gastropubs, it was the cheapest cut on the pig. Housewives scored the skin, rubbed it with salt, and laid it on a bed of carrots, parsnips, onions, and potatoes in a deep roasting dish with a cup of water. The lid went on. 3 hours later, the fat had rendered into the vegetables, the meat was fork tender, and the skin had turned into crackling where it poked above the liquid. 1 piece of belly fed 5 for about 1 6. The rendered pork fat flavored every vegetable in that pot so deeply that children ate their parsnips without being asked. Number 7. Lamb shank and barley soup. A single lamb shank, too bony for roasting and too awkward for the frying pan, was the perfect candidate for the soup pot. It was browned first, then simmered for 3 hours with pearl barley, carrot, turnip, and onion. The marrow melted out of the bone and enriched the broth with a silky richness. The barley swelled and thickened everything, and the meat fell away in tender strands. 1 shank produced enough soup for 2 meals, cost about 1 shilling in 1955. Mothers served it with nothing more than bread and butter. It needed nothing else. Number 6. Mince and tatties. Scotland's weeknight answer to everything. Browned beef, mince with onions, a shake of flour to thicken, water or stock to cover, then simmered for 30 minutes until the gravy turned rich and dark. Served over a mountain of mashed potatoes, with the gravy pooling in the crater on top. Half a pound of mince stretched to feed 4 when the potatoes did the heavy lifting. The whole meal cost about 2 shillings. Children mashed their fork through the potatoes and gravy, mixing until the plate turned brown. It was not elegant. It was magnificent. Every Scottish family had their version. Every mother's was the best. Number 5. Sausage and lentil, 1 pot. Red lentils and pork sausages in the same pot were genius born of necessity. Brown the sausages, add diced onion and carrot, Throw in a mug of red lentils, cover with water, and simmer for 40 minutes. The lentils dissolved into a thick sauce that clung to the sausages. No cream, no stock cube, just lentils doing what they do best. A pound of sausages and a cup of lentils fed 5 for under 2 shillings. The lentils made 4 sausages look like a feast. Mothers who discovered this trick never went back to sausage and mash. Number 4. Mutton and caper stew. Before lamb replaced mutton on every counter, this was the stew that defined Sunday tea across the Midlands. Chunks of mutton shoulder were braised in a white sauce with capers, onions, and a bay leaf. The meat was strong and fatty, and the capers cut through the richness with a sharp, vinegary bite. It was served with boiled potatoes added to the same pot for the last 30 minutes. Mutton cost about 1 shilling a pound in 1952, much cheaper than lamb. The capers in their little jar lasted months, with a few spoonfuls per stew. This was Sunday dinner for families who could not afford a roasting joint. 1 pot on the table. 1 flavor that nobody who tasted it ever forgot. Number 3. Cock-a-leekie. Scotland's answer to chicken soup, and arguably the better version. A boiling fowl simmered with leeks, prunes, and pearl barley in a single deep pot until the bird fell apart and the broth turned rich and golden. The prunes were the surprise. They dissolved into the liquid, adding a dark sweetness that balanced the savory chicken perfectly. Some families removed them before serving. Others left them in and dared visitors to guess the secret ingredient. A boiling fowl cost about 3 shillings. The leeks and barley came from the garden and the cupboard. 1 pot fed 6 generously, and the broth improved overnight if there was any left. Number 2. Lancashire hot pot. The definitive one-pot dinner of working Britain. Layers of lamb chops, sliced onions, and thin rounds of potato were built up in a tall pot filled with stock and baked for 3 hours, until the top potatoes crisped and the bottom ones melted into the gravy. Every layer told a story of careful economy. The lamb chops were the cheapest cut. The potatoes did triple duty as base, body, and golden lid. The onions disappeared entirely, leaving nothing but sweetness. A proper Lancashire hot pot cost about 2 and 6 to make, and fed a family of 6, with leftovers for Monday. In mill towns, the smell of hot pot baking was the smell of Friday evening, the smell of wages spent wisely. Number 1. Scrag End Stew. This was the one. The meal that kept more British families fed through more hard weeks than any other dish on this list. Scrag end of lamb, the cheapest, boniest, most despised cut at the butcher's counter, simmered for hours in a single pot with whatever vegetables the larder offered. Potatoes, carrots, turnip, onion, a bay leaf, salt, and pepper. Nothing more. The bones gave up their marrow and gelatin. The tough meat surrendered to the long, slow heat. The broth thickened and darkened into something that tasted like. It had no right being so good for what it cost. Scrag End was 6pence a pound in 1953. The whole stew cost barely a shilling. It sat on the range all afternoon, filling the house with a smell that pulled children in from the street and told fathers hanging up their coats that everything was going to be all right. This was the dish that proved 1 pot, 1 flame, and a bit of patience could turn almost nothing into a meal worth remembering. Housewives did not call it clever. They called it Tuesday. These 30 one-pot dinners tell the story of a Britain that fed itself on ingenuity when the purse was light and the cupboard was bare. Try one this week. Taste the stovies, the scrag end stew, the ham hock and beans. Come back and tell me your nan did not know exactly what she was doing.